Hi, welcome to Movies, where we talk about movies. My name is Zoe, and welcome to my channel. So this is the first video on my channel that's gonna actually pertain to what I want to do on here, which is movie reviews and movie commentaries. I'm actually really excited to get into this because it's something I've been looking forward to for a couple months, and I have been planning out for a while, basically all summer. And yeah, I have a lot of ideas for videos that I want to post, maybe even a silly little review of this movie. Might be kind of hard to see the poster, but if you know the poster, you know the movie, so look out for that. In today's video, we're going to be talking about film bros, the stereotypes, the men, and the movies. I picked 7 movies from the Film Bro Starter Pack list made by Claire Richards on Letterboxd, excluding one of them, to see if I myself am a film bro, or at least have the same taste as them. So you may be asking yourself, what is a film bro? According to an Urban Dictionary post made in 2019 by the user Satu, a film bro is a person who views themselves as a huge film nerd while having mostly surface level knowledge of movies. According to another user HelloFresh, not the brand, a film bro is an arrogant and often condescending person who pretends to know a lot about film but actually only appreciates movies with visual panache and no narrative depth. Film bros are one of the most notarized and recognizable subgroups within the film community. If you're a movie lover, you've definitely had a run-in with a film bro, where they went on and on about how Christopher Nolan should be the most celebrated director alive, which, let's get a grip, maybe. Or bully someone relentlessly for not having seen a certain movie and cause the literal 5-mile radius around them to never pick up the movie itself. So, from both of those definitions, we can definitely come to the conclusion that film bros might not be the most accurate with their movie opinions, especially since they tend to focus on hyper-masculine leads, male-directed movies, and have a very narrow mindset and view on what they will watch. They're convinced that their opinion is the best opinion and everybody else is wrong. If you don't like Tarantino, you're basically the scum of the earth. They deter a lot of people away from these movies because they tend to focus on the toxicity and the masculinity within them. Like, for example, they treat Tyler Durden as the king of pariahs and those who were cast out, and Patrick Bateman as misunderstood rather than a raging narcissistic psychopath. I don't know how they managed to do it, but they completely look past all the murder that takes place, which is just kind of crazy. Most of the time, film bros don't even have a firm grasp on the movies that they're talking about because, again, they refuse to accept any other opinions that aren't their own, so they won't do any research into the movies or look any deeper than their own surface level opinions. I'm not saying that you have to look intensely and critically at every single movie you pick up. I personally have been enjoying that lately, especially since I am trying to declare my minor as cinema studies, so I have been trying to put myself in that mindset, but it's not for everyone, and not every single movie needs to be that deep. Now, I understand corralling a whole group of people under a harmful stereotype can be hurtful to some people in the film community, but so is misogyny. So maybe let's cut that out, and then I'll stop shitting on men. Maybe. We'll see. When I was researching for this movie, I also found a list titled Sigma Male Movie List on IMDb, and not only did it have Breaking Bad, which is a TV show, but it also had all the Kung Fu Panda movies. I don't know if I missed a few chapters, but Poe is a feminist. I don't know where y'all got this idea that he is a Sigma male. He's literally a panda who, like, fights Kung Fu for his friends. That's feminism if I've ever seen it, you know? Now, with that being said, don't take anything that I'm saying to heart because it's all my opinion. It is not the Bible and you don't have to follow it. That's the fun part about movies, is that it's boundless. You get to watch whatever you want to watch and like whatever you want to like. If you do take any of this personally, that's your own problem. I'm talking about the awful, misogynistic, condescending, and hierarchical film bros, the ones who just literally think they're better than everybody else. They're the annoying ones. If the shoe fits, I'm sorry. If it doesn't, I hope you enjoyed this video. I tried to keep these reviews pretty spoiler-free because I myself am not a fan of spoilers at all. I know some people are, which is like, I can't even wrap my head around that. My sister loves spoilers. That's so strange. I know some of these movies came out literally years ago, some 20 plus years ago, but I don't want to be the one who spoils a movie for somebody, so I do put up warnings before I say something that is a spoiler from the movie. And the first movie we're going to be talking about is Fight Club. And the next movie, I'm just kidding. Get it? Because you can't talk about Fight Club. Okay, guys. Okay.
Get off the stage!
Fight Club was directed by David Fincher and released in 1999, most notably starring Brad Pitt as Tyler Durden, Edward Norton as the narrator or Jack, and Helena Bonham Carter as Marla Singer. It follows the story of an insomniac trapped in his blue-collar life, he who supposedly has it all but feels absolutely nothing. He finds comfort in attending support groups for diseases and illnesses he simply just doesn't have, and crying into Bob's chest, because who wouldn't? Fight Club is a really fun watch, and I was hooked from the beginning. I'm a fan of David Fincher, personally, if you can't tell by the Gone Girl poster. I also have a Fight Club poster, you just can't see it. It's my little secret. Gone Girl is actually one of my favorite movies of all time. I could confidently say it's probably my second favorite. Swiss Army Man, always in the top, but that's a whole separate video that I plan to make on here because I swear I could talk about that movie literally for hours. I'm actually shocked at how long it took me to pick up this movie. I actually thought for the longest time it was literally about wrestling. I thought it was an MMA sort of thing, or wherever they fight. I don't know, and so it wasn't very interesting, but I picked it up again for this video, and I'm really glad that I did. Jack leads a life of success, and even though he does have a penthouse, a well-paying job, and a sculpted social perception, that doesn't get rid of himself. Brad Pitt even talks about why he picked up the movie, and I quote, "I'm the guy who's got everything, but I'm telling you, once you get everything, then you're just left with yourself." These characters have lost their grip on reality and are grasping at the straws of capitalism and consumerism to fill the void, such as working a job that pays rather than a job that they love, or becoming numb to the day-to-day American life, which is wake up, eat, work, 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 sleep, repeat. However, pain is what brings them back. Pain can represent grounding and what it means to be human. Everything in these men's lives are so superficial that the pain is the only real thing about them. They're lying in their lives, in their jobs, to the people that they love, but they are truly their authentic selves in Fight Club. And on the surface, this is some big macho masculine film, which it definitely is. It encourages anarchy in this sense of lost masculinity and that the world was working against them. But I like that this film discusses anti-capitalism, the terrifying truth in finding comfort in violence, and the consequences of that. It's a critique on the men who blame the world for everything, who don't take any blame for anything that they do, when a lot of the time their own actions are the reason that the consequences are coming towards them in the first place. Unfortunately, a lot of men, especially when this movie first came out, honed in on the whole masculinity part of this movie, and they took it as an inspiration rather than something that they should avoid, and they thought that this is how masculinity should look on a man. It should look like anarchy, uprising, and absolute craziness. I mean, there's bombs, there's robbing, there's so many other crazy acts in this movie. This movie is basically the epitome of men doing everything but going to therapy. It's insane. They come up with all these ideas on how they're gonna fix their lives, but never once are they like, maybe a therapist would be able to help me with these problems, and not all of these super aggressive and lean toward violence men. You know, who knows? I think the casting for this movie was perfect. Honestly, I think if you were to switch out the actors in any of the roles, it would completely change the whole movie. Brad Pitt plays a brilliant, exuberant stunner that everybody wants to be, and Edward Norton plays a brilliant, darkly comedic and monotone narrator. Alongside that, Helena Bonham Carter plays a wonderful Marla Singer. She's the rugged, I take no shit from no man character, but she also has a deep sadness that follows her throughout this film. Now, I'm not saying these actors are exactly like the parts that they play, but they know exactly how to play them. And it scared the shit out of me when Jared Leto showed up on my screen, cause that was a jump scare. I was not prepared for that. He did look like a little cutie with his blonde hair though, I won't lie, but that man is genuinely so terrifying, so scary. I love the way that this movie was shot because to me it felt like a video game. The winding shots going through different levels of apartments and through the sewers just felt so animated, and I think it made the movie so much more fun. And I love how chaotic the editing is as well. it pushes for this whole chaotic and uneasy feel with the jumpiness of the cuts and blips of Brad Pitt for literally only milliseconds. It leaves the audience just as confused about reality as Jack is, and I think this immersion quality makes the movie all the more better. One of my absolute favorite things about this movie is actually the soundtrack. It reminds me a lot of the Beastie Boys, which is a group that the Dust Brothers have worked with before. I felt so cool when I was walking around listening to this soundtrack. I think it has equal amounts uneasiness and coolness in the same way that the film does. Some of my favorites are Who is Tyler Durden, Psycho Boy Jack, Homework, Stealing Fat, and Jack's Smirking Revenge. Stealing Fat is really cool. It completely switches up in the middle. I thought I was listening to a completely different song. This movie is really fun. I love how everything works together really well, from the colors to the characters to the cast. Overall, I would rate Fight Club 4 stars. And the next movie I'm going to be talking about is Top Gun. Top Gun is an action film that was released in 1986, directed by Tony Scott. This movie stars Tom Cruise as Maverick, Anthony Edwards as Goose, Val Kilmer as Iceman, and Kelly McGillis as Charlotte. This movie, to put it simply, is one giant propaganda poster for joining the military. And honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of it. This is the only movie for this video that I didn't re-watch because I found it so boring the first time. I'm sorry. I'm a hater by birth. I was born this way, I can't change. Top Gun follows Lieutenant Pete Mitchell, a reckless fighter pilot who coined the nickname Maverick. He's offered a spot at the Top Gun Naval Fighter Weapons School where the best of the best pilots train and quench their need for speed, which is actually where this quote originated from, was in Top Gun. One of the only good things about it, but I'll get into that. Honestly, to me, this movie was just 110 minutes of Tom Cruise's character Maverick acting like a complete douchebag and getting away with it the whole time. Nobody ever checks him except for like one sergeant. I don't know the actual titles, but just like one guy checks him like in the very beginning, and then from there on they're just like, oh, he's like that. He loves breaking the rules. You know, we can't stop him. He's literally flying like fighter jets with other people. He's putting other people's lives at risk. He's such a goofy character to me. I acknowledge I'm not the target audience for this, seeing as I have no interest in planes, military, or men, so take this review as you will. I felt that the movie focused more on the cool plane montages and combat elements than the actual characters themselves. At least as the viewer, I could feel the effort that they put into these flight sequences, so why couldn't they have put that same effort into the characters? Even a little bit more time, even a little bit more. I'm not asking for these super deep characters that I could talk about for hours and they have so many layers to them. Just a little bit more than like the douchebag chasing after the girl and his friend and his enemy. You know, I know this movie is meant to have a bunch of fun flight scenes and focus on the aircrafts that were used, and that's the whole appeal of the movie. But when you just leave it to that, there's no solid foundation for the film to stand on. For Pete's sake, this movie is almost 2 hours, and I really just could not give a damn about any of these characters. And spoiler, the only time I really did start to feel anything for any of the characters was when Goose's family was introduced, but they were introduced purely so you felt even worse when he did die in like the next scene. I find it hard to enjoy a movie when I can't even root or find any real genuine elements in the main character. All he thinks about is dangerously breaking these rules that were obviously put in place for a reason. So, I don't know, Maverick, let's use some critical thinking if we are going to put lives at stake, maybe. Just my opinion. Another part of this movie that I think just did not work at all was the romance. It felt so forced. It was almost as if Charlotte didn't even want to be talking to Maverick for most of the time. I didn't believe the chemistry between them at all. And honestly, I'm not alone in this. They had to reshoot scenes past the end of filming, and that's the reason that Kelly McGillis wears a hat in some of her scenes, because she literally had a completely different haircut. They had to reshoot romance scenes. You don't need that if you have a well-written romance. I'm not saying it needs to be the most fleshed out thing in this movie, because the romance shouldn't be the focus, but a little bit more effort would have been appreciated as a viewer. Now, going on to the soundtrack, I think it's pretty good. It has a lot of super fun 80s songs, and it's well curated to the film itself. A lot of the songs were actually made for this film, like Danger Zone and Take My Breath Away, which I didn't know. But honestly, this felt to me like one of the only actual redeeming qualities about this film. If planes flying in the air for minutes at a time and shallow characters are your recipe for a perfect movie, then you probably love Top Gun. But unfortunately, I just can't get down with this movie. I won't deny the influence that it had and the classicness of it, but the poor acting on Tom Cruise's part and so many other details in this movie could have used more work. So overall, I would have to rate this 1.5 stars. And the next movie I'm going to be talking about is The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is the second movie in the superhero action Dark Knight trilogy, directed by Christopher Nolan and released in 2008. Batman, alongside Lieutenant Jim Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent, have a pretty good hold on the crime in Gotham until a chaotic criminal by the name of the Joker begins to wreak havoc on the city. Christian Bale stars as Bruce Wayne, Heath Ledger as the Joker, Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, and Maggie Gyllenhaal as Rachel Dawes. Going into this movie, I wasn't that excited. I'm not a super big Christopher Nolan fan. Interstellar didn't really do it for me. Another movie that I review in this video, Inception, was kind of a letdown. And Dunkirk was a drag, especially with Harry Styles. Stop putting that man on the big screen. I have, however, been really getting into the Batman, especially following the Batman coming out this year with Robert Pattinson and Paul Dano. So I don't really have the best knowledge on the comics and older Batman movies, so take with that what you will. Now that I've seen this movie, it's really cool to see where Matt Reeves drew some inspiration for the Batman. There's a lot of comparable shots in The Dark Knight to the Batman, and I think that's really cool. I felt my attention slipping in the first 45 minutes of the film, but however, as the action began to pick up, so did my attention. The action sequences were all really unique and different from one another, showing a range of explosions and car crash scenes. My favorite was when a motorcycle detached from the Batmobile and it rode up a wall. I thought that was really cool, very unexpected. I also felt like the script was really cheesy and disgenuine at times. An iffy script can immediately pull me out of a movie, and in this case it did. Some of the lines like, "What doesn't kill you makes you stranger," but like, I know the Joker is supposed to be some goofy guy, but that was just so corny. And other lines like a cop saying, "Okay, that's not good," when like a building exploded. And then there was another point where the characters were like, "He made the choice nobody else could make. The right choice." That's just so corny. And I just feel like for how big this movie was, I was not expecting these cheesy ass lines. I've seen arguments where people have talked about this movie being a satire, and while I see a lot of the irony that's included in this, I feel like deeming it a satire is almost a cop-out because of how silly the script is. Call me crazy. I really did enjoy the display of the anti-hero in this film. I personally love myself some raunchy anti-hero storylines, especially when done well, and I think in this movie it definitely was. Batman is known as a hero because he has a moral code and oftentimes works alongside the law, and he typically doesn't kill people, and I know in the comics he had a no killing rule that was established at some point. See, I'm learning. But in The Dark Knight, Batman was and still is a vigilante. He took crime into his own hands before working with Gordon, and at the end of Dark Knight, spoilers, he lost respect from the citizens when he took the blame for Harvey Dent's crimes. While some understand that Batman isn't a threat, in Nolan's interpretation especially, Batman is somebody that could be feared. Society blurs the lines between the Joker and the Batman, because to them there's no clear difference. It's just two people wreaking havoc on the city and encouraging anarchy. At least, that's how they see it. Another part of this movie that didn't really hit for me was Christian Bale as the Batman. He doesn't really come across as the brooding, dark Batman that I wanted to see in this movie, and the suit looks really bulky on him. Like, he's always standing in the back, like... The worst part, though, was the voice. I literally just could not take him seriously anytime he opened his mouth and would talk with the Batman voice. But Zoe, he has to hide his identity. Literally do anything else. He could have made his voice more monotone. I don't know, just something different. Because if I did this video with that voice, nobody would watch this.
Hello, welcome to Moses.
I liked the depiction of Bruce Wayne as a cocky socialite. It's definitely interesting, but I feel like Christian Bale played a better Bruce Wayne than he did Batman. Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, however, I was a huge fan of. I think he was really good at playing the embodiment of insanity and society facing these repercussions for fashioning the Joker. He uses a lot of subtle facial expressions and voice inflections, making the Joker even more unsettling because of this whole sense of not truly knowing what he's thinking. Especially when you learn about the story behind the scars aren't all true, and he keeps his cards typically really close to his chest. No pun intended. The Joker in this movie is really playful while also being deeply terrifying. The scene on the boats where they both have a button had me on the edge of my seat, and I thought I knew how it was going to end, but I didn't, and I think that's a really fun component for an action movie to have. As for the soundtrack, Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard combined their powers to produce the Dark Knight soundtrack. And I'm a huge fan of Hans Zimmer. I really don't think I could ever label anything he's ever made as bad or poor quality, but this soundtrack wasn't my favorite of his. The final song, however, I thought was super cool. While I watched the film, this song stood out to me and I definitely wanted to make note of it. All in all, this movie did what needed to be done for a high-stakes Batman action film. It's pretty good and it showcased some pretty great performances. Overall, I would rate The Dark Knight 3.5 stars. Now, following the theme of Christian Bale, I'm going to be talking about American Psycho. American Psycho was released in 2000 and is directed by Mary Harron. This movie stars Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman, Willem Dafoe as Detective Donald Kimball, Chloe Sevigny as Jean, and everybody's favorite Joker, Jared Leto as Paul Allen. And it's based off a novel that was written by Bret Easton Ellis. This horror comedy follows Patrick Bateman, a rich investment banker living in New York City who kills for entertainment and the pure desire and need to kill, from sex workers to the people that he works with. The first time I watched this movie, I found it enjoyable, but now that I've rewatched it for this video, I just know she's an it girl. This movie exposes the corruption and the selectionism within the upper class, and the extent people will go to cover up the horrors that happen behind the scenes in order to maintain a high status in society, especially to cover for cis white men in power. In my opinion, that's one of the scariest parts about this movie. You watch Bateman get away with everything, and nobody cares enough to stop him. People care more about money than putting a sadistic serial killer behind bars, even going as far as stripping his murder house of all evidence just so the New York estate wouldn't drop in value. A landlord doesn't want to tell the tenants that this penthouse was home to a slew of murders, so instead of reporting the bodies, they secretly disposed of them and hid them under the rug. We get to be inside the mind of Patrick Bateman, getting to hear his inner thoughts from his morning routine to why he likes to kill. The lines of reality are blurred because of this incredibly unreliable narrator. He suffers from insanity and tends to see things that just aren't there, confusing the audience into what Patrick Bateman is really doing, or if it's all being fantasized about in the way that it is in his journal. This movie is insanely funny, and there are loads of quotable one-liners and comedic scenes that cause me to laugh out loud while rewatching. Something about a businessman going absolutely apeshit over a business card and the layout of it is just such a silly concept, and you can't help but laugh, because this continues to anger him throughout the entire film. He can never forget about it. Patrick Bateman, although terrifying, has a lot of comedic, almost caricature moments. He's an exaggeration of a corporate psychopath, and Christian Bale's performance perfectly complements the body comedy and mindset needed to play this character. His performance is nothing short of fantastic. He is Patrick Bateman. He mastered the character and brought him to the screen. Even when Bret Easton Ellis wanted to meet with Christian Bale to confirm that he was the right Patrick Bateman for this movie, Christian Bale showed up as Patrick Bateman, dressed as him, acted like him and everything, and it scared the EBGBs out of Bret Easton Ellis, but this further proves the point that he was perfect for this film. The phone call monologue is absolutely insane to experience and watch. Watching Bateman go through an entire array of emotions for the entire movie that he hasn't shown or even hinted at having. He breaks down, and it's pathetic, but he captures the absolute psychopathy that Bateman is experiencing. He's lost his mind and intends to take everybody down with him. You really think for a moment this might be the end for Bateman. There's no coming back from this. But in the end, he does, just as he intended. Everything goes perfectly. American Psycho is a really fun, comedic, and terrifying watch, and I think that's what a lot of people love about it. So I would have to rate American Psycho 4.5 stars. And the next movie I'm going to be talking about is The Wolf of Wall Street. The Wolf of Wall Street is a comedy drama that was directed by Martin Scorsese and released in 2013. The cast consists of Leonardo DiCaprio as the big man Jordan Belfort, Jonah Hill as Donny Azoff, Margot Robbie as Naomi LaPaglia, and a lot of other big names in Hollywood. Unlike any of the other movies I discuss in this video, this is the only one based off of a true story. We follow Jordan Belfort from when he started as a measly broker to how he worked his way up in Wall Street. When he was in his prime on Wall Street, he was the head of a firm called Stratman Oakmont. There, they would encourage unknowing citizens to invest in a stock, and then instead of actually putting that money towards the stock, they would take a lot of that change home as commission. I don't know the actual logistics of stocks, so if I am wrong in that, oops. There's drugs, sex, lots of drama, and lots of money. It is truly a frat boy's wet dream. But as far as storytelling goes, this movie nails it. When you think about a movie about a douchebag broker who just takes money from people who don't even realize, it's not the most interesting tagline and not the most interesting plot, but somehow Martin Scorsese does a wonderful job at telling a very entertaining story about a character who's not even that likable. A majority of the characters in this film are really unlikable, but somehow as you're watching the movie, you can't help but root for them in certain insane scenarios. The first time I watched this movie, I was a freshman in high school, and I was shocked by how fascinating I found this and by how short the 3 hours felt, because this movie is 3 hours long. That's a hefty movie, and for that to feel that short is insane. There's a clear and concise storyline that's told through high-energy, comedic scenes and over-exaggerated, insane scenarios. The plot is strong and pushes through continuously, and it's a really fun watch to watch with other people as well. This movie could also be considered a horror movie from how scary these men are. They are literally horrifying. I would rather jump off a cliff during the craziest storm you've ever seen in your life than stand in a room with any of these men for 5 seconds. The way that they just look at women is actually so nasty. Jordan Belfort, you can stay far away from me unless you want to give me some money. The scene between Jordan, Donnie, and Rugrat when they're just throwing down coke during a phone call, like, oh my god. It's really funny, but it's just insane that these guys just think that's like completely normal, and it's probably exactly what happened in real life. But this movie does serve a reminder that these are the ones who are controlling it all, controlling corporations, controlling the government, and it's honestly pretty terrifying. If you ever want to be reminded about how scary men can be, just turn on this movie, because it'll put that right into perspective. Overall, I would rate The Wolf of Wall Street 4.5 stars. Alright, moving on to the next one, Inception. Inception is a sci-fi action film that was released in 2010 and directed by Christopher Nolan. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Cobb, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Arthur, Elliot Page as Ariadne, and a bunch of other recognizable actors, even Ocean Eye Cillian Murphy. Inception follows the story of Dom Cobb, an intelligent thief who infiltrates people's subconscious to steal information. During a mine heist, the target Saito notes Dom's skills and offers him a job that will grant him access back into the States, where he is known as a criminal. I'm not gonna lie, I was not a big fan of this movie, and as I mentioned earlier, it was kind of a letdown. I was really excited. I think the concept is super cool, but it just lacked a lot in my opinion. I'm also not here to complain about the inconsistency in the physics and the math, because quite frankly I don't know anything about that and I don't really care, so that's not the main focus or why I necessarily dislike this movie. To me, this movie focused more on the craziness about dreams that it sort of lost the plot. You can have a complex plot without getting lost and convoluted, and unfortunately this movie did. The whole dream concept was not very straightforward at all. Its attempt at being multi-layered and blurring the lines between dream and reality got really muddy, and I felt like I was lagging behind while watching. I often had to distinguish whether something was in a dream or whether it was reality. The progression of this movie felt chaotic, and it's not that this movie confused me, it's more so that my brain just felt like it was constantly working to figure out what was going on. I was so focused on trying to grasp the last thing that was said that I often would miss another interesting scene or line said by a character. I felt the same way when I watched Interstellar. It tried so hard to stand out that honestly it ended up just fading right into the background for me when it comes to sci-fi. Apologies to all my Interstellar lovers out there, including my roommate. Hey Jamie. The soundtrack bangs though. I won't lie. And you know who made it? Hans Zimmer. Exactly. And I think the CGI effects in this movie are also pretty cool, so I did want to note that. I liked that each character had their own trade, like the architect, the forger, the extractor, and they're all pretty distinguished. I don't really have a problem with any of the characters themselves. Cobb definitely made some interesting choices throughout the film, however. Especially everything surrounding Maul can be really frustrating to watch. I know that's how it should be, but I don't know. However, this soundtrack does go really hard. I was a huge fan. I didn't really notice it while watching the movie. It's kind of hard for me to pick up on a soundtrack the first time that I'm ever seeing a movie because I'm more focused on the plot and the characters. I listened to the whole thing through when I was walking through a museum, and it's honestly a beautiful soundtrack. I am obsessed with a majority of the songs in it. When I was on my way back from the museum, I was listening to Mombasa, and I literally was doing like the gay speed walk. I was just going so fast. I felt like I was racing against the clock and there was no time limit. It was just a song making me zoom through the streets. While the movie's plot is definitely interesting, I mean, invading someone's mind through dreams is pretty cool. I just wish I hadn't been let down by this. And it had some fun action and CGI, but that didn't really save it for me. So I would have to rate Inception 3 stars. The last movie I'm going to be talking about, and my personal favorite, is The Joker. Joker is a 2019 crime drama directed by Todd Phillips. This film stars Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck, our Joker, Frances Conroy as Penny Fleck, Zazie Beetz as Sophie Dumont, and Robert De Niro as Murray Franklin. We watch Arthur Fleck, a failed comedian and performing clown, on his journey of loneliness and the destruction of his mind leading to the Joker. I love this movie. When I saw it in 2019, I literally was stunned. Like, I was speechless after I finished this movie. I cried through a majority of it, and I just felt so many things throughout it. I love movies that make me feel really intense emotions, and this one definitely did. This movie touches on the theme of being an outcast and just being seen as a nobody to society. It's very heartbreaking to watch, especially watching the character Arthur Fleck. He suffers from a brain injury that causes him to laugh uncontrollably, whether that be in situations that make him uncomfortable or others throughout the film. This movie, in my opinion, accurately depicts the blatant ableism that's been okayed in society, viewing people as weirdos or freaks for conditions and illnesses that can't be controlled, and how hateful and disgusting these views can be, even enough to shape a killer. I'm not blaming society for every single thing that Arthur does throughout this movie. He definitely makes a lot of mistakes, some by his own choice, but they definitely do play a big part in why he is the way he is as an adult. He was somebody who existed and was alive, but treated as dead. He went unlistened to and unheard for so long that he went through the ultimate extremes to finally be noticed and acknowledged as existing. Joaquin Phoenix's performance in this movie is absolutely jaw-dropping. His laugh is insane. I think it is the perfect Joker laugh. Watching Joaquin Phoenix act, I truly believed this man was losing himself. This is one of those movies where I was so engrossed in the film and the character that I was feeling everything that they were feeling. I couldn't help but cry a lot even when I rewatched this film, especially in the beginning, not so much towards the end. We get to watch this terrifying transformation of the Joker, and it's very hard to watch, but you can't help but feel so much empathy for this character now that you know this awful backstory. Arthur suffers, is belittled and beaten and publicly embarrassed, and all you can do is hope that it goes up from here, but we all know the story of the Joker and how it ends. It's heartbreaking, and paired with Joaquin Phoenix, who truly brings this character to life, you can't help but feel awful for Arthur. It's not fun to empathize with a villain, but getting to see such a raw backstory, it's impossible not to. And I have looked at the Joker different ever since I've seen this, and he's a very different character to me post 2019. This movie is shot so well. The blue and green overtones emphasize how sad this movie really is, and in the iconic words of Phoebe Bridgers, "Jesus Christ, I'm so blue all the time." And that's exactly how Arthur Fleck is. Primary colors also play a huge role in this film. I read a super interesting article by Philip Honnell that really dives into the use of color in the Joker, and I think you should totally check it out. I'm gonna link it in the description. In the shots, when blue is around, it is suffocating Arthur, whether that be the city, a majority of off-putting and sad scenes that take place, a lot of people around him wear blue, the hospital, even the tunnel that the ambulance drives down. Red plays the part of the sun shining through and represents healing, but not necessarily entirely healing. It can also represent his sanity. Or, in a way, it can represent his confidence. Like, when he's performing his comedy show, he wears an all-red outfit, he's trying to be confident, and he feels like himself. That leaves yellow. That represents madness. A lot of shots have blue and yellow battling for dominance, representing Arthur's internal battle between choosing a miserable life and unwillingly blending into society, or choosing anarchy and the uprising he began. Or in scenes between groups, It's the city being dominated by anarchy. In the shots between red and yellow, it's a choice between healing or descending even deeper into the madness. I definitely recommend checking out this article. It goes way deeper into everything I said, and it was honestly such a fun read and super interesting if you find color and color grading and all that in film an interesting role. Because I mean, the color in this film, I feel like could be a character in itself. It is such an important part of this movie. The soundtrack is also one of my favorite parts of this film. The chords drag behind and have a certain heaviness to it and a deep sense of longing and sadness, especially in the bathroom scene, the iconic one where he's doing his little jig and he's just dancing in the bathroom. It's so drawn out and I just can't help but feel like I am like sobbing. That's the only way I feel like I can describe it. It's chilling and sad all wrapped up in one, and it's a very haunting soundtrack, and it just goes with the movie so well. I can't emphasize enough how much I love this film. So I would have to rate Joker 5 stars. So at the end of the day, I'm not really a film bro, but I guess I do have the taste of one, because a lot of these movies were fire, and I would scream that from the mountaintops, especially about Joker. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far into the video. If you liked it, leave a comment or a like. I want to have some discussions with y'all in the comments. Unless you are a real film bro, then don't comment, because y'all are kind of scary, just a little. I want to have some discussions in the comments, whether that be if you liked what I said, if you didn't like what I said, or just new things about the movies that I didn't mention in this video. If I was kind of all over the place in this, I apologize. I'm still trying to get a grasp on talking about movies in a critical way and thinking more deeply. Like I said in the beginning, it's a learning process, but I'm excited to do it here and do it with you guys. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna leave my socials and my letterbox down in the description, so if you want to reach me anywhere else, that's where I'll be. And if you don't want to comment down below about the movies that I talked about today, comment about the most recent movie that you watched and the review you had, because I'll definitely give it a read. I'd love to hear. Alrighty, I will see you guys in the next video. I'm just kidding, I'm not